There's a special kind of irony in finding out your wife is cheating on you because of her obsession with crime. Not committing it. No, that would be too cliché. No, my wife is the kind who binges serial killer documentaries while folding laundry and thinks it's romantic that Ted Bundy had a girlfriend who didn't know. You know, the usual red flag wrapped in a weighted blanket. We've been married 6 years. Live in a modest 2-story ranch house in Indiana with a perfectly brown lawn and a fridge magnet collection from every town we've never actually visited. Michelle, my wife, is the kind of woman who has a Pinterest board titled Dream Crime Scene Wedding Cake, but tells people it's ironic. Lately, though, things got weirder. It started about 2 months ago. She'd pause her podcasts, usually something like Blood Trail, Midwest Forgotten Killers, and ask questions. Not normal ones like, would you ever poison me for life insurance? Which she has asked, playfully. No, these were targeted. Can police trace deleted text from, say, 3 months ago? I looked up from my coffee. Is this trivia or a cry for help? She laughed. Said she was doing research for a crime writing contest. Thing is, Michelle can't write for squat. Her texts look like ransom notes written by a squirrel on Adderall. But I nodded and went back to my crossword. Then came the second hit. What's that thing called? You know, the one that mimics a cell phone tower. I blinked. A stingray. She beamed. Yeah, that. Could someone track a burner phone with it? Now I'm no genius, but if you've ever seen your wife quietly Googling how to scrub IMEI data, your ears start to perk up. Still, I let it slide. People go through phases. Last year she was into artisan bread baking. The year before that, indoor plants. Maybe burner phones were just another hobby. Until I found one. It was a Wednesday morning. I was trying to grab the last of the Cinnamon Toast Crunch when I knocked over the box. A clunk that didn't sound like cereal echoed out. Inside? A black prepaid Nokia, screen smudged, battery full, text still saved. Hidden in a goddamn cereal box like we were in a low-budget mob movie. Now, I'm not proud of this next part, but I went full mission, impossible. I didn't yell. Didn't ask questions. I did what Michelle should have known not to do. I texted my cousin Nate. Nate's a contractor. Kind of. He's got an actual job, sure, but he also tinkers with surveillance tech. He used to work in network security before he got fired for creative misuse of company resources. Long story short, Nate has a Stingray device he built from scratch and a casual disregard for federal wiretapping laws. I gave him the burner phone. We tracked its last pings. Abandoned duplex on 5th and Arlington. One of those places Michelle claimed she was considering flipping. Funny, because Michelle can't hang a picture without asking which way is up. But hey, maybe she just liked asbestos and broken dreams. Nate and I drove by the place that Saturday. 2 cars were parked out front. One was Michelle's. The other was a slick gray Audi, and not the kind you buy working HR at a regional supply company. This was finance bro level. Or, as I later learned, real estate developer level. Married, 42, father of 2. Guy's name was Darren. I'd met him once at a Christmas party. He complimented Michelle's good eye for square footage. It clicked. Every fake site visit, every over-explained errand. My wife was playing Nancy Drew by day and starring in her own erotic thriller by night. And here's the thing. I wasn't even that angry. No rage, no heartbreak. Just this deep, calm amusement. Like watching a raccoon try to open a can of paint with its teeth. You're grossed out, sure, but mostly impressed. Michelle loved true crime? Perfect. I was about to give her a case she'd never forget. I had the audio clips. I had the burner phone. I had Nate, the tech gremlin. And I had an idea. One that would make Michelle wish she'd never heard the phrase cold case. Next stop, podcast world. Stay tuned. It gets so much better. Now, when I say I was going to make a podcast, I don't mean some garage quality mumblefest with 2 guys named Chad talking about Bigfoot. No, I was going to craft a true crime experience. One that would feel so real, so unsettling, that Michelle herself would think she downloaded it by accident. But first, I needed to do what any good criminal mastermind does, get more intel. And I mean painfully specific intel. If I was going to build her affair into a fake murder podcast, I had to get all the juicy pieces just right. The sin of their secrets. The rhythm of her betrayal. So I kept playing dumb. That was the easy part. Michelle, bless her heart, has the subtlety of a marching band. She'd come home from consulting with a drywall guy and smell like cologne. Not even subtle cologne. This was the kind that screamed midlife crisis in Italian. I think it was called arrogant or something equally on the nose. I started leaving small bait, little traps to see how far down the rabbit hole she'd gone. "Hey babe," I said one evening, sipping a beer and scrolling aimlessly, "you think we should install security cameras on the porch? I saw a thread on Nextdoor. Someone's been snooping around empty houses." She went pale, like soap fell in the prison shower pail. Why?" she stammered. I shrugged. "Just seems like a lot of abandoned properties getting attention lately." She bit her lip, changed the subject, talked about redecorating the guest room, which is rich, since she hadn't set foot in it since she moved her renovation binder in there, aka the burner phone's charging station. So I waited until she was out, which was often, and took my little detective act to the next level. Nate had already cloned the burner phone. He rigged it to auto-forward every call and text to a dummy Google Voice number. If Michelle sent Darren so much as a pizza emoji, I'd see it. And oh, I saw plenty. There were the usual lovebird texts. "Last night was insane face-blowing kiss," or "You make me feel alive again." Barf. But then it got interesting. Michelle wasn't just sleeping with this clown. She was helping him file for city grants on community revitalization projects. Let me translate that. She was faking neighborhood cleanup documents so Darren could pocket taxpayer money. It was genius in the slimiest way possible. She'd stage photos of renovations at that duplex with new curtains and cheap paint, then submit them as Phase 1 completion photos for a $12,000 neighborhood renewal grant. I mean, damn. She couldn't even manage our Amazon returns without asking for help, but now she was laundering municipal funds? Gold star, babe. Anyway, that's when the revenge plan really crystallized. I wasn't just going to expose her affair. I was going to make her, and Darren, the stars of the most compelling true crime podcast Reddit had ever heard. Nate, God bless his morally flexible soul, helped me set up the infrastructure. We created a podcast brand, The Cold Porch Files. Cover art? An ominous photo of a rundown Indiana duplex with the title in that gritty, typewriter-style font people eat up. Fake voice actors? Check. AI audio modulation? Check. I even paid a $5 guy to do the gravelly narrator voice. And the content? Oh, baby. That's where I shined. Episode 1 was titled, Creeks on Arlington Street, The Disappearance of a Husband. It opened like this. March 18th, 2024. A local man vanished without a trace. His wife, a bubbly HR manager with a love for true crime, claimed he left for work and never returned. But as detectives peeled back the layers, they uncovered a web of burner phones, abandoned houses, and illicit grant fraud. This is the Cold Porch Files. I narrated it all under a pseudonym, Tom Black. I told their story, twisted just enough to make it sound anonymous, but painfully specific if you knew what you were listening for. Each episode followed the timeline I'd uncovered. The affair's beginnings, told through anonymized voicemails and interview transcripts, actually just my buddy Chris and me voice acting. The burner phone discovery. The fake renovation grants. Darren's shady property deals. The missing husband, presumed dead. By episode 4, I introduced the twist. Michelle and Darren weren't just having an affair, they were suspects in a potential murder-for-profit plot. I layered in suspenseful music, grainy fake interviews, and even spliced in audio of dogs barking, glass breaking, and faint whispers. And then, I uploaded it to her favorite podcast subreddit. The thing exploded. The true crime freaks went nuts. They analyzed every detail. People on Reddit started speculating it was based on real events. Some even guessed it was possibly based in Indiana because of a passing line about Midwestern grant codes. One commenter said, "I swear to God I saw this exact house on Zillow last year." Michelle was obsessed. She didn't know it was me. She binged all 4 episodes in one night and spent the next morning pacing around our kitchen, muttering to herself. "Do you think this podcast is fake?" she asked, feigning casual. "Probably," I replied, sipping coffee. "But it's good, right? Makes you think how well you know people." She nodded slowly. Too real, honestly. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Her job, the very firm that handled payroll and employee ethics for Darren's real estate group, got wind of it. Some junior associate heard the podcast, recognized Darren's voice in the spliced recordings. I'd used a clip from a speech he gave at a Chamber of Commerce event, which Michelle had once sent to her mom. HR launched a quiet, internal review. Darren panicked and ghosted her. She came home that night, looked like someone had dropped her off at rock bottom without GPS. She tried to talk. I smiled. "Long day?" I asked. "Yeah," she whispered. "Want to listen to episode 5 together?" I hear there's a big twist. She froze. It's funny how crime stories always end with the villain in handcuffs or on the run. But not this one. This one ends with a podcast, a Reddit meltdown, and a woman realizing the killer in the story was never the husband, just the narrator, telling the truth, one episode at a time. They say the worst thing you can do to someone isn't yell at them, or hit them, or cheat on them. It's making them feel seen when they desperately want to stay invisible. Michelle wasn't used to that feeling. She liked control. She liked the illusion that her secrets were stashed in neat little Tupperware containers, sealed and stored where no one could smell the rot. But my little podcast? It popped every lid, and I could see it, the unraveling. That Friday morning she stood in the kitchen like she didn't know where the light switches were. She wore one of her big cable knit sweaters, the kind she reserved for hangovers and existential dread. The coffee pot was full, untouched. Michelle never skipped coffee, not unless she was too rattled to function. "Did you finish episode 5 yet?" I asked casually, opening the fridge and pretending to look for eggs. I already knew we were out. I tossed them the night before for dramatic effect. She didn't answer at first. Yeah, she said. "It's a lot." "Makes you wonder," I said, pulling out a half-full orange juice like it was evidence. "How many people out there are living double lives, hiding whole chapters of themselves while the rest of us are just reading the table of contents?" That one hit her. I could see it land. She nodded slowly, eyes fixed on some invisible point between the stove and her regrets. "Do you think it's real?" she asked after a long pause. "The podcast?" I shrugged. "Sounds real. But maybe it's just a clever fake. You know how true crime junkies are. Always hungry for the next train wreck." She bit her lip and nodded again. Her voice dropped an octave. "I think it's real. Too many details feel lived in." "That's because they are, sweetheart." She left for work 2 hours early that day. Said she had a lot on her plate. What she really had was a meeting with HR, Darren's HR. The podcast had made enough ripples that legal started snooping. And guess whose name was on 3 of the community improvement expense reports? Michelle. The abandoned duplex was listed under her project coordination credentials. And the icing on the cake? Darren had submitted her name as an independent civic partner, which is the real estate version of throw her under the bus and speed off. So now Michelle was in the hot seat. Her boss asked her to take a leave of absence until things cooled down. She came home that night like a ghost with a hangover. Didn't even take off her heels. Just flopped face down on the couch like gravity had finally called in a favor. "You all right?" I asked, knowing full well she was about 2 hours from Googling how to disappear and start over. "Work stuff," she mumbled. "Want to talk about it?" "No." I walked into the kitchen and started the dishwasher just so the clattering white noise would drown out the sound of my grin. Episode 6 went up that Sunday. I titled it, "The Renovator's Fallacy, When Good Intentions Go to Court." The episode featured a brand new interview Michelle's character, voiced by an AI-generated voice based on her phone calls to Darren. Nate had created a model from the audio logs. The voice said things like, "No one's going to check the permits, babe. The grant office barely has time to read past the first page. The house doesn't need to be finished. It just needs to look finished for the photos." The community lost its mind. Reddit users began piecing together real-life counterparts. One user even dug up a property transaction report from the city's online database and found an eerily similar duplex recently flipped for $28,000 profit, with Michelle's legal name attached as the buyer's agent. I had to admit, Reddit detectives are more dangerous than the FBI. In 48 hours, they'd mapped a possible suspect list and narrowed the location to somewhere near Anderson, Indiana. Michelle didn't say anything, but I could feel the tension buzzing off her skin like static. She kept her phone close, her laptop even closer. And late at night, I'd hear her crying in the guest room, probably scrubbing every email, every forwarded file, every text thread. And still, I said nothing. Why? Because this wasn't about rage. This was about clarity. And I wasn't going to lose the high ground by getting petty. Michelle wanted secrets? I'd give her mystery. She wanted stories? I'd give her a legend. And I still wasn't done. That week, I printed out one of those novelty true crime corkboards. You know the kind. Red string, black and white photos, ominous notes scribbled in Sharpie. I hung it in the basement, then invited Michelle down with some excuse about reorganizing storage. She walked in, saw the board, and froze. "What is this?" she asked. "Just a fun hobby," I said, inspired by that podcast. She scanned the board. The layout was vague, just enough detail to make her sweat. Fake names. A sketch of the duplex. A blurry photo of a car that looked suspiciously like Darren's Audi. I'd written only 2 words at the center of the board in thick red ink. Why lie? Michelle stared at it for a full 10 seconds, then turned around and climbed the stairs without a word. It was working. The next night, I caught her watching a YouTube tutorial on how to erase data from a MacBook. Not delete. Erase. Full wipe. I checked the recycling bin the next morning, empty. The burner phone disappeared, too. So did a flash drive I'd seen her keep in her nightstand. She was erasing herself. But here's the thing. The podcast episodes weren't stored on her laptop. Or mine. Nate had mirrored every file to a private server and scheduled episode drops weeks in advance. She could destroy her whole digital life. It wouldn't matter. Her story was already out there, spinning through the web like a virus made of guilt and Wi-Fi. And then came the best part. She got a message. From a producer. Some startup in Austin that ran niche investigative YouTube channels wanted to buy the rights to the Cold Porch Files. Said they'd been following it for weeks. Wanted to option the series for a docu-style pilot. Michelle didn't see the message. I did, because I controlled the podcast email. I responded, "We're interested, but we'd like to keep the identity of the source anonymous. For now, you can call us Tom Black." That was my final touch. Selling her own nightmare as content. Monetizing her affair. Michelle always wanted to be famous. Now she was. By the time episode 7 dropped, I was genuinely concerned for Michelle's cognitive stability. Not in a get-her-help kind of way, more like watching a raccoon trying to operate a Roomba. Fascinating, confusing, and somehow endlessly satisfying. She was unraveling. Paranoia had moved in, ordered room service, and was now dictating the layout of our living room. For starters, she started triple-locking the front door. Every night. Like the FBI was going to bust in and find her hoarding city grant forms and illicit burner text in the freezer. Ironically, that's exactly where I found a USB stick later. Nestled behind the ice tray like a digital Shane cube. And it wasn't just the locks. She'd unplugged the Alexa, disabled Bluetooth on her phone, and covered our webcam with electrical tape. When I asked if she was expecting the CIA, she laughed a little too loud and said, "Better safe than sorry." Right? Right, Michelle? Because your little Craigslist romance and a few fraudulent invoices have surely landed you on Langley's radar. But I let her spiral. In fact, I encouraged it. At breakfast one morning, I casually left a notepad open on the counter, written in neat block letters. Possible accomplice has started deleting digital trails. Urgent. She saw it. I know she did because she moved it an inch to the left, Michelle's version of a silent freakout. That day, she skipped work. Told her boss she had a migraine. Spent 8 hours scrubbing her social media. Deleted Facebook. Deactivated Twitter. Took down her Pinterest boards like the FBI was about to do a deep dive on her sourdough starter obsession from 2020. It was beautiful. Meanwhile, the podcast had taken on a life of its own. Episode 7, titled The Sledgehammer Clause, hinted at the renovation permit scheme being tied to a local councilman's re-election campaign. Total fiction, mostly, but vague enough that Reddit went full True Detective on it. Conspiracy threads popped up. Was the city hiding evidence? Were these ghost homes part of a tax laundering scheme? Could the woman in the podcast, the bubbly HR girl with a dark side, be real? I watched it all unfold while pretending to fix the garbage disposal. Oh hey, I'd say from under the sink, did you see that post claiming the podcast might be based in Anderson? Michelle would freeze mid-sip of her kale smoothie. Yeah, weird coincidence, right? Super weird, I'd say. Crazy how people always end up outing themselves. Like it's in their DNA. She'd nod slowly. Swallow hard. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her skull, clogged with panic and oat milk. Then came the neighborhood incident. We were taking a walk, or rather, Michelle was power walking like she had warrants, and I was pretending not to enjoy watching her sweat in silent fear, when one of our nosy neighbors, Linda, stopped us. "Hey you too," she chirped, holding a watering can shaped like a flamingo. "You wouldn't happen to be listening to that podcast everyone's talking about, would you? Cold. Something?" Michelle went stiff as a popsicle. I smiled and said, "Oh yeah. Great stuff. Really immersive." Linda nodded. "My niece says the couple in it sounds just like someone she knows. Isn't that crazy?" "Totally," I said. "Small world, huh?" Michelle mumbled something about needing to check on the dryer and took off toward the house like the ground was lava. I followed, of course. Wouldn't miss this theater for anything. Later that night, she did something even I didn't expect. She printed out transcripts of the podcast episodes. I found them in the trash the next morning, not torn up, not burned, just wadded and tossed like last week's coupons. Each page was annotated in red pen. Circled phrases. Underlined timestamps. Little notes in the margins like, could be coincidence? Change Darren's ringtone? Delete email to H.Wilkes. Who is this? She was reverse investigating her own crime scene. Trying to outsmart a podcast she didn't realize I was feeding her in real time. At that point, I knew she'd break soon, but I needed the finale. Something public. Something theatrical. So I made episode 8, the season finale. Titled it, The Porch Light Fades. What Happened to Darren and Michelle? It opened with the sound of a storm. Thunder rolling. Then my gravelly podcast voice came in. They thought no one was watching. That the paperwork was messy enough to disappear into the cracks. But every crack has a witness. And every witness has a story. Then came the twist. The episode claimed Darren had vanished. Poof. Gone. And Michelle? She was last seen boarding a bus out of state, carrying nothing but a duffel bag and a flash drive. None of it was true, of course. Darren was still around, only now under an audit and quietly ghosting everyone from the city council to his own marketing team. And Michelle? She hadn't left the house in 3 days. Her version of witness protection was hiding under a weighted blanket and watching YouTube tutorials on how to find hidden cameras in your home. Still, the story caught fire. True Crime Daily picked it up. Reddit turned it into a meme. Some lunatic even made a TikTok breaking down Michelle's guilty micro-expressions from old Facebook videos. By the time Michelle figured out she was the character, she wasn't even mad. She was scared. I knew because she finally confronted me. It was a Tuesday night. Rain was tapping against the windows. Classic ambience. I was reading in the den, a cold glass of bourbon in my hand, pretending not to notice her standing in the doorway with a laptop clutched to her chest. You made it, she said. I didn't look up. Made what? The podcast. I closed the book slowly. Set down my glass. And what makes you say that? She didn't answer. Just stared. Then quietly. Why? I shrugged. Because you love true crime. I thought you deserved to be part of one. She didn't cry. That would have been too clean. Too expected. She just nodded, turned, and walked away. The next day, she packed a suitcase. Told her mom she was coming to stay for a while. Left me a note on the fridge. You win. Or maybe I lost. Doesn't matter now. Michelle. I poured myself another bourbon and smiled. No yelling. No fights. Just a quiet exit. A ghost finally accepting she was seen. And me? I was already writing season 2. There's a strange silence that settles over a house after a storm. Not peace, not exactly. More like the hum you hear after a concert ends. The air's still thick with noise, but there's nothing left playing. That's how it felt after Michelle left. The suitcase was gone. Her charger was missing. She even took her stupid velvet bathrobe with the initials MD stitched on the collar, like she was a member of some secret infidelity fraternity. She didn't slam the door when she left. Didn't leave a dramatic voicemail or a playlist of sad songs. Just that note on the fridge, clipped under a magnet shaped like a screaming goat. You win. Or maybe I lost. Doesn't matter now. Which was kind of poetic, in a passive-aggressive haiku sort of way. I didn't reply. Instead, I spent the next day walking the house with a whiskey in hand, cataloging everything she'd touched. The coffee mug with a lipstick stain. The charger that wasn't mine but was somehow always plugged into my outlet. The half-used sticky notes on the fridge that said things like, renew dog tags, and buy turmeric. I left it all where it was, like evidence at a crime scene, a monument to her collapse. But here's where the story should have ended, at least in a conventional sense. She leaves. I drink. The podcast lives on. Roll credits. But this story wasn't built for closure. A week later, Michelle called. It was from a number I didn't recognize, a disposable VoIP line, most likely. Classic move. I let it go to voicemail. Then I played it on speaker while I brushed my teeth, half interested. Her voice was cracked but calm. I want you to know I listened to it. All of it. Again. Every episode. I guess I just needed to hear it all once more, now that I know. A pause. Breathing. You're better than I thought. At hiding. At playing along. I underestimated you. But you already know that. Another pause. A long one. I don't hate you, you know? Maybe I should. But I don't. I don't know who I am now. If you want to talk, I'm staying at Mom's. Click. I stood there, foam in my mouth, just watching the little blue blinking light on my phone. Felt nothing. Not pity. Not rage. Just emptiness. Like I completed a game and unlocked every achievement, and now the map felt useless. That should have been the end. But then Darren called. Well, not him. His lawyer. Apparently, Darren was now being formally investigated for grant fraud. Multiple counts. The city had opened an internal audit. Turns out Reddit was right. Someone connected the podcast to a few real financial discrepancies, and the dominoes started falling. The lawyer was fishing. Wanted to know if Tom Black, the pseudonymous podcast creator, had any original documentation tied to the claims in the episodes. I told them I had no idea what they were talking about and hung up. But I knew what was coming. Michelle was about to be dragged into this. Publicly. I wasn't sure if she knew yet. She'd been laying low, barely posting anything, radio silent online except for one cryptic Instagram story showing a coffee cup next to an open Bible. Caption said, "Starting over." Yeah, okay. The following week, the hammer dropped. Someone from the county ethics office issued a press statement. No names, just vague language about a real estate developer and unaffiliated partner being implicated in a misuse of funds investigation. But the true crime subreddit? They had a field day. They'd known since episode 5. They dissected every audio clip, cross-referenced every phrase with Google Maps. One guy posted a drone shot of the duplex on Arlington Street, same one Michelle used to visit with Darren. Another found a zoning application filed under her maiden name. It was over. Her mother's house was swarmed by local press the next morning. Nothing huge, just 2 nosy stringers with DSLRs and a podcast blogger wearing a Murderino hoodie. But enough to make her feel hunted. Michelle called me again. Voicemail again. This one was shorter. I get it now. You wanted me to feel like a case file. Like a headline. You did. Congrats. Just, please don't go any further. I'm begging you. The thing is, I wasn't the one going further. The story had taken on a life of its own. People were remixing the podcast episodes, making TikTok reenactments. One girl even posted a dramatic reading of Michelle's fake voicemail from episode 4, crying into a bowl of popcorn. I didn't respond. But then came the part one didn't expect. My boss called me into his office. See, what I hadn't accounted for was that my name would eventually pop up. Not publicly, but quietly. Someone at the city auditor's office had noticed my IP address accessing grant files tied to Darren's LLC. They traced it back to my house. And now, my boss wanted answers. You've always been solid here, Brian, he said, rubbing his temples. But I gotta ask, are you involved in this cold porch thing? I smiled. Legally, no. He didn't laugh. I was told to take a sabbatical. Paid. For now. Suddenly, I had a lot of time on my hands. Again. So I decided to do something a little reckless. I emailed the podcast network, the one that had offered to option the show. I told them I was open to selling the rights to the Cold Porch Files under one condition. It had to be animated. Why? Because I wanted Michelle to watch a cartoon version of herself break down on screen. I wanted her to see a 2D rendering of that duplex on Arlington, hear a chipper narrator say her name in a cutesy voice, then watch Reddit melt down again. They agreed. Contract signed. NDAs inked. The show was slated for Q1 next year. Animated. Stylized. Satirical. Everything Michelle hated. She wouldn't be able to look away. And just to twist the knife, I added a final narration to the series. One last upload. Just a short bonus episode. In it, the narrator speaks softly, like a bedtime story. Sometimes, the villain isn't a killer. Sometimes, it's someone who just forgets who they are. They lie. They cheat. They build houses out of paperwork and hide behind drywall and white lies. But the truth? The truth always finds its way home. A pause. This episode is dedicated to him. No full name. No address. But she'd know. Oh, she'd know. And just like that, the podcast went dark. Finale aired. Threads closed. Fans cried. Some begged for a sequel. Others speculated about a season 2 set in another small town. But me? I just sat back, sipped my drink, and watched the porch light flicker one last time. It's strange, the way a storm settles into your bones after it's passed. You'd think the dust would clear, the air would lighten, the world would offer some kind of closure. But no, it just gets quieter. Heavier. Like the silence after a punchline no one laughs at. A month after the final episode aired, the Cold Porch Files was officially retired. I removed it from every platform. Not because I had to, the legal team from the network handled that part, But because the story had done its job, Michelle was in hiding. Darren had disappeared off LinkedIn. And me? I'd become something of an urban legend in our corner of Indiana. Not that anyone knew it was me. Not directly. But there were whispers. A couple of my neighbors stopped inviting me to their backyard fire pits. One even asked if I really worked in IT, like I was some kind of deep state provocateur. I didn't mind. I preferred the space. The podcast's animated adaptation was still in production. I'd reviewed storyboards, watched early animatics, even helped voice the narrator for the pilot. They offered to hire a professional, but I said no. I wanted to hear the story told in my voice, smooth, cold, unblinking. Meanwhile, Michelle went underground. Her social media? Deleted. Her job? Gone. Her friends? Muted or blocked her out of self-preservation. Even her own mother, who once called me emotionally unavailable for not attending Michelle's candle-making workshop, had grown tired of the fallout. I heard through the grapevine she'd moved in with an aunt in Muncie. Small town. Big shame. But here's where the twist comes in. Because every story like this needs a twist. About 2 months after she left, I got a package. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in small block letters across a brown paper parcel. I opened it on the kitchen counter with a steak knife. Inside was a black leather-bound notebook. No note. No card. Just the book. It was Michelle's. I recognized her handwriting instantly. Sharp slanted cursive with open loops and tight spacing. She used to write out grocery lists like it was calligraphy. The first page simply said, "If you're reading this, then you already know who I am." This is what I couldn't say out loud. And what followed? Confessions. Not the fake, performative kind she used to give when caught in a lie. These were raw, unedited. Pages and pages of fragmented thoughts, like a diary written in reverse. She talked about how it started with Darren, not out of passion, but out of boredom. She said she'd never actually felt in love with him, that he was a symbol of something she couldn't explain. Risk. Escape. A middle finger to the life she'd built and didn't know how to admit she didn't want. But she didn't stop there. She confessed to fabricating parts of her job application at the city housing office, to signing for permits she didn't read, to taking petty cash from her firm's Christmas fund and replacing it with Monopoly money as a joke. They didn't find it funny. She also admitted something else. Something bigger. Darren hadn't used her. She had used him. She knew about his shady finances. Knew he'd once been investigated for tax fraud. She'd seen the cracks in his empire and thought, if she aligned herself with him just right, submitted the paperwork just carefully enough, she could skim off the top and leave clean. It was supposed to be her exit strategy. And then I found the burner phone. And everything went sideways. The last few pages of the notebook were different. They read more like letters. To me. She apologized, kind of. Not for the cheating or the lies, but for underestimating me. Subscribe to the channel